All right, so today we're looking at a beginner's Arri Trinity setup, and this is the GlideGear G2G 500. How's it going? My name is Andrew Murphy from Down Under in Gold Coast, Australia. So if you're like me and you use a gimbal often, you know how much of a backbreaker it can be, especially when you're using like bigger gimbals like the Zhiyun Crane 3S with bigger setups like say the Canon C200. And the best way to distribute the weight is with a vest, but how do you keep your camera on a gimbal whilst also using a vest at the same time? So the GlideGear G2G 500 is a GlideCam-like vest setup, which allows you to mount a gimbal on top, giving the best of both worlds in one setup. It gives you full 3-axis gimbal functionality, whilst also allowing you to shoot for longer periods of time in the same package. For the full setup, you actually need the vest and the arm, as well as the G2G 500, which is the bottom bit of that GlideCam setup. But otherwise, if you've already got any of these bits, you can actually just buy them all individually as well. And you also get a heap of weights and accessories as well to get everything balanced up. All right, so to set this up, we first need to mount whatever gimbal we decide to actually use. And this is done via the 3/8 inch screw on the top of that bottom section. For my setup, we used the Zhiyun Crane 3S, and this supported the weight of the Canon C200 really nicely. Next, we need to set the height of the gimbal on the actual bottom section. This is done via these 2 rods right here. Now, one thing to note is that the knobs to tighten these screws on these rods are really hard to do up. Like, I had to use vice grips to actually tighten them enough to actually hold the weight of the gimbal on top of it. And once you've mounted it, you obviously need to balance the camera on the gimbal just like balancing a normal gimbal. And if you don't know how to balance a gimbal, then I'll actually leave a link up here showing you exactly how to do it step by step. Now, if you do have a second person to help you with this process, it makes it a ton easier. And once the actual gimbal portion is balanced, what I did is I actually locked all the axes to stop the camera from just like flailing around. So if your gimbal has that, then definitely do this. And then we can actually start balancing the GlideCam portion of this setup. Now, to balance this part, I basically set this up like an old school GlideCam. So if you've ever balanced a manual GlideCam, then you know how this part goes. To do this, we want to make the drop from a horizontal to a vertical position about 2 to 3 seconds. And we can change this by adding or taking away weights from the bottom, or actually extending the pole as well. This part takes a freaking ton of time, like a ton of time. Then once the drop timing is correct, we can then start to distribute the weight so it actually balances vertically as well. Again, this process is really slow and it's really tedious because every time you add or adjust the weight, you have to obviously let it fall and let it settle to see how it's actually balancing. But the more time you spend here getting it all balanced up, the better results you'll get in the end. So definitely spend as much time as you can getting this right. And once it's actually all balanced right, it should look something like this. Now, once you get all this done, we can put on the vest, attach the arm, and then attach it all together. If the whole setup isn't sitting around level with your body, then you need to adjust the springs on the arm to actually support the weight of the camera more. Once it's all actually tensioned up properly, it should sit roughly at eye level without actually being touched. Now, I'll be honest, it actually does a pretty decent job of supporting the whole setup once you've actually set it up properly. Jason and I shot some test footage side by side using this full glide vest setup and then using just the gimbal by itself. And it's actually noticeably smoother with the actual vest setup on, especially in that like Z axis or the up and down axis, and especially when transitioning from that high mode to the low mode. But above all else, the biggest difference I found was just how much less fatigued I was when I was shooting with the actual vest on. Like, after just one take using the Zhiyun Crane 3S by itself, I actually had to put down the full setup and actually like stretch out and wait before I did my next take. Whereas with the GlideGear G2G 500 full setup, we did a ton of shooting. I think we did like 6 or 7 times. And at the end of that, I was like barely feeling it at all. So the actual practical use of it is pretty good. However, it's not all perfect. So in terms of the actual build quality, it's kind of what you'd expect from a cheaper product. And to me, it seems kind of like it's a semi-finished product. Like, if we look at the knobs to lock in the height adjustment portion of the bottom section, they're really badly designed. They're super hard to tighten up. And like, if you look at all the different types of knobs, it kind of seems like they've just grabbed a whole bunch of different hardware and put it together to kind of just make it work. I also noticed that when using an extension piece under the Crane 3S, which puts it into what they call javelin mode, it ends up putting far too much pressure on the actual middle bearing, and it causes it to lock up completely when you're in that horizontal mode. So if you're actually gonna mount a gimbal like say the Ronin S, which has like a battery grip, be aware that when you're actually going horizontal, that middle bearing takes a lot of weight and it doesn't actually spin that well. I also actually found the vest to be a little bit uncomfortable. Like the padding is okay, but that design of the chest plate doesn't sit very well, especially like, cause I'm a bit of a smaller build, and we found that the straps really struggled to accommodate like a smaller build like myself. Now, Jason and I actually found that you can mount that chest plate backwards and actually takes a lot more weight off your arms and allows you to shoot for even longer. But actually getting it set up like this by yourself is basically impossible. Like you have to have someone else with you to get it all ready. But keeping all this in mind, it's only $299 US for the actual G2G 500 system if you already have a vest. But if you need like the vest and the arm as well, it's gonna be another $399 USD on top of it. But this is still less than half the price of something like the tilt to float system, so it really is suited towards that kind of like budget-friendly indie filmmaker vibe. Right guys, if you did enjoy this one, then consider liking and subscribing. And if you want to find out more about any of the products listed in this video, I'll leave the links down below. And as always, stay creative and just be you. See ya.